So we will be recording this meeting, so thank you, Ed, for joining us today. We will have some questions during this webinar, so if you want to go ahead and drop those in the chat, we will do our best to answer them as we get through. But again, we are recording this meeting, and if you want to send it to your colleagues later on, we will send you the recording at the end. Who I am, I'm Nathan, Nathan Campbell, consultant here at SNL International. Who we are here at SNL International, we're an IT consulting firm that's been in business for about 25 years, what I'd like to say since Windows 98. So we do consulting and servicing and engineering. And the kind of three pillars of our company are going to be data security, infrastructure, and data protection and availability. So, we'll talk a little bit about today about data security, but the goal within our firm is to talk with you and your company, which is going to best fit to keep your data secure and in place. So we have a bunch of different partners, one of which we're going to talk about today with CrowdStrike for data security. And then, of course, systems and network infrastructure, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, a variety of different partners and solutions that will fit your business best in those categories. And last but not least, data protection or availability. Things to talk about would be your recovery point objective and recovery time objective, and how we can better improve those fitted for your business. Next slide, please. So kind of as I mentioned, we offer customized solutions. So we don't just present one thing and say, hey, this is the best for your business and your environment. We go set calls to talk to you about how we can find the best solution for your particular pain point at that time. And if something has come up, offer comprehensive updates on what's up with that particular solution, or maybe after a few years, what's the best in class at that particular time, and continue with adaptive support from us here at SNL, whether it's setting a call with our sales team or a follow-up question for our engineering team. Our experience and expertise is we got a lot of time with our team of engineers. Most of them have been with us for about 15 years. Most of them, again, double digits as well. So we know the ins and outs of the solutions that we sell and just all into IT environments, whether it's on-prem or in cloud. So I always make the joke, try to stump the engineer. And again, we've been in business for 25 years, so we've built long-lasting relationships for a variety of different clients of a variety of different industries, and help to grow those even starting today. And if you do have any questions for us, feel free to reach out. I know myself, I will be in contact with everyone that's attending the webinar within a few days to a few weeks. But if anything comes up, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to connect with you on on how to build the relationship. And with that, I will pass it off to Brian and Matthew at our partner CrowdStrike.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nathan. Great to be here with everyone today. Again, by ways of a quick reintroduction. So Brian Nagle and Matthew McDermott coming to you live from Boston. We work in tandem as the identity protection specialists here at CrowdStrike. I'm on the account management side. Matthew's on the technical side. And yeah, we appreciate your time, and we're very excited for today's session. Looks like a great group of attendees. And I think that is indicative of the topic we're covering, and really the threat our customers see on a daily basis when it comes to Active Directory. So just before we start, if you have any questions during the session, please ask as we go. We'll do our best to answer in real time. Full disclosure, Matthew and I are very informal presenters. We like to have fun, so ask away. We'll take them live. We want to make sure we're covering exactly what you want to learn more about. So with that being said, we're going to break this conversation into two parts. The first part will be around what we've learned here at CrowdStrike from our customers and the problem as we see it. And the second, from a platform perspective, will be around how we're protecting our customers from modern Active Directory attacks. So for the purposes of this conversation, it is important up front to remember that at the very core of CrowdStrike, we are an intel organization. Go back 10 years before we ever had the Falcon platform, the first thing we did was intelligence. Intelligence is absolutely core to our DNA. And what we have seen over the past 18 to 24 months is a dramatic rise in the use of valid credentials as part of adversary activity. It's living off the land techniques. It's the ability for the adversary to gain a credential that can be off the dark web. It can be phishing a user. There's no shortage of ways to gain a cred and then use that cred to authenticate, get into an environment, look normal, and then start to move laterally. So on the slide here, the 62%, and the data we're showing you here comes from our 2022 threat report. It's available on our website if you'd like to download it and take a look. But 62% of the detections that we index as a company, and that, as I'm sure you can guess, is a very, very large amount of data. 62% came from credential-based living off the land techniques that were malware-free. So what does this mean? It means we're seeing the adversary evolve to evade modern defenses. And if we dig in a little deeper and define what we mean by a modern attack is really a two-part problem. It's code execution on an endpoint, and then with a valid credential, it allows for broad access. Now, execution on one endpoint isn't the end of the world, but paired with a valid credential, that's when it allows broad access. So for us at CrowdStrike, we continue to observe this, and our focus is on the ability to understand the totality of the adversary and how they not only gain access, but how they move around the environment. And again, when you boil it down, we've not only seen a dramatic increase in this activity, but we see a renewed emphasis on lateral movement. To use a fun analogy, we often equate it, Matthew and myself, we will explain it as, to our customers and prospects alike, as the alarm system on your car. If you have CrowdStrike on your endpoint, if someone comes along, walks up to your car, smashes the window, the alarm's going to go off. That's no different than an adversary hitting an endpoint. If you have CrowdStrike on that endpoint, the alarm's going to go off. But what happens one day if you're getting out of your car and your keys fall out of your pocket and you don't realize it? What we're seeing the adversary going after and gaining credentials. They're getting the keys to your car, and then they're driving around without you knowing. They aren't executing code. They look normal with the use of a valid credential. So we're going to go take a look here at the MITRE attack framework. And this data is collected over the past 12 months or so. And I realize this is a bit of a busy slide, but it is important because if you go across the different categories from initial access to persistence, to privilege escalation, to defense evasion, the top tactic by a mile is valid accounts. And where do valid accounts live? They live in Active Directory. They live in Azure AD. And if we drill down even deeper, and I find this to be super interesting, is we find evading modern defenses, adversaries, they're smart and they continue to evolve. And 25% of the time, again, this refers to attacks that we've detected and seen within the Falcon platform and through our services organization. We're seeing the adversary focused on unmanaged assets as their place to land. And what is an unmanaged asset? An unmanaged asset, it's a legacy system. It's a contractor account. It's a system that, for whatever reason, you can't put modern endpoint protection on. So once the adversary lands there, they then use a valid credential to move around. They execute code on that one machine, or maybe they don't even execute code at all. And that one valid credential is being used as the car keys to drive around the environment. And when we break this down even further, but wait, there's more. When we break this down even further and we look at what adversaries are doing and why you should care, well, this right here is what attacks have looked like historically. It starts with initial access. But in the scenario we just walked through, it allows the adversary to get to a point of lateral movement very, very quickly. we have seen the speed of execution on the adversary side to continue to increase dramatically. So to us, the power of our customers to be able to respond quicker than the adversary is absolutely the most important thing. So what you're going to hear today and where we're going to focus is around detection and response to lateral movements of a valid credential within the Falcon platform and how we're using this data to play offense against the adversary. Before we fire up the UI, let's very quickly sum up how we're going to tackle this threat. And when we're talking about that threat within the Falcon platform and when we're talking about Active Directory and protecting against modern Active Directory attacks, we're really doing three main things. We're protecting, we're enabling, and we're preventing. Protect, prevent, and enable. You can tell I'm not reading off the slides since I'm not going in order. But to break it all down to still even further, when you think of protect, when we say protect, what we mean is you are going to have the ability to see like the adversary. You are going to have attack path visibility. When we say prevent, what we mean is it's no longer enough just to detect threats. Those days are over. You need to be able to detect and block in real time identity specific threats. And you have to be able to do that through dynamic policies. In the final piece, enable, think of that as we're going to verify only when the risk changes. Because if we're tying everything back to a CrowdStrike's mission statement of preventing breaches, and more specifically as it relates to identity, is protecting against modern attacks by securing and protecting identity, frictionless conditional access is of the utmost importance. And that is something we take great care to ensure. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen. We'll have Matthew, or as we like to call him, Matty McID, fire up the UI here, and we'll take a peek under the hood.
All right. And just to confirm, everybody can see my Windows 10 workstation here?
Yes, sir, Matty McID. We can see it.
All right. Thanks, Brian. So folks, we're going to start off with a brief demo. So I have two different workstations here. Only difference is one has a Falcon sensor and one does not have the CrowdStrike sensor. And I further want to reiterate what Brian was getting at, right? 25% of all data breaches that our complete Overwatch teams analyzed last year were actually stemming from machines that did not have CrowdStrike installed. So what we'll do, and just to prove a point, right, if I pull up command prompt, so just to validate that I'm logged in as myself, from there, get some system info, right? From an adversarial perspective, what we'll want to do, and scrolling way too fast here, I apologize. This is our domain, right? And this is really the DC that we're interested in. Again, if I'm an attacker, I want to move laterally and I want to do that quick, really a quick breakout time, right? So what I'm going to be targeting is that domain controller in the environment. Now, the last command I'll run here, just to validate that the CrowdStrike sensor is installed. And I'll just start using this since I'm scrolling way too fast for my own good. Right, and we'll see it's running. So if I go to my other workstation and do something similar, all right, and I'm not going to run the system info, it's in the same domain, I'll save you that. But service failed, meaning that the CrowdStrike sensor is not running. So with that being said, we'll go back to my machine that does have the Falcon sensors installed, right? And what I'm going to do is something pretty seamless. I'm going to go ahead and run Mimikatz. And for what it's worth, everybody, Mimikatz will be allowed to run. I have CrowdStrike in a monitor-only policy. Otherwise, wouldn't be nearly as fun, right? And we can prove that Mimikatz runs and does what it needs to do behind the scenes. So if I'm an adversary, right, and in theory, CrowdStrike would have prevented this again in a production environment, but I let it run, and I'll circle back to that in a minute, why I let it run. But if I'm an adversary, right, I would have got kicked off this machine. So the path of least resistance would be therefore to actually go to a machine where CrowdStrike is not installed. Hence my other workstation here. Now, why this is important again is because, well, hey, if CrowdStrike's not installed, well, I can do whatever I want without worrying about any EDR or antivirus blocking me. So what I'll do is open RDP, right? And I'm going to attempt to move laterally to that domain controller I alluded to before. And give me a minute, it's a very long DC name. I'll type in my credentials. And you'll notice I can use a restriction. So the question becomes, well, CrowdStrike's not installed on this machine. How is it preventing me from RDPing? And I realize this message doesn't look like it's CrowdStrike, but I can promise you it certainly is. So that's where we actually lead into the UI. And what we have running behind the scenes here is pretty magical. So we jump into Fusion Workflows, and Fusion Workflows is essentially our no-code SOAR automation orchestration. So the thought process is this. If we see a new endpoint detection, detection equals credential dumping. Again, think Mimikatz, which I ran, hence why I let it run. The domain, it's in my domain, and finally, it's my username. So essentially, if the endpoint client detects Mimikatz, what we're going to do is add that user's Active Directory account to a watch list, and we're going to add that endpoint to a watch list. And thirdly, we're going to send an email, which I certainly received to get my little Microsoft chime in my ear. So why this is important? Again, if I'm an attacker and I get boxed out and prevented by virtue of the CrowdStrike sensor, what I'm going to do is go to a machine that doesn't have the Falcon sensor. Obviously, if the Falcon sensor isn't there to prevent me, well, that's a lot easier of a path forward. But why we added my user account to a watch list here is anytime that my AD creds show up anywhere in the environment, whether it's a machine that has CrowdStrike installed or not, whether it's a domain joined machine or not, it doesn't matter. If my combination of username and password attempts to re-authenticate against the domain controller, CrowdStrike will notice that by virtue of having the identity sensor installed on your domain controller. So dive back into policy rules here. And all I simply want to highlight is this. Right, so this rule behind the scenes that prevented me from RDPing. So again, the thought process is if Falcon is not installed, second workstation we went through, my Active Directory account is on a watch list, and I was on that watch list by virtue of running Mimikatz. And thirdly, I attempt to RDP, outright block that authentication. Again, pretty simple. So from a CrowdStrike perspective, we can really help expand our coverage to not only machines where the sensor's installed to actually machines where sensors aren't installed for whatever reason, right? Think third-party contractor that's authenticating its domain controller, BYOD, right? If users are bringing their own machines and again, authenticating against the domain controller, or a machine that has an unsupported operating system. Think all the way back to Server X 2003, Windows XP, right? Something that a lot of antiviruses still don't support from I shouldn't say still don't support, but don't support anymore from a sensor perspective. So the way I like to envision how the identity product works here, very much think of us as a watchtower, right? Certainly we're seeing all the internal authentications, so all the valid lateral movement that users do moving from machine A to machine B, maybe an authentication that's requiring an LDAP connection, right? We'll see that. But also that use case that we just ran through of machines that don't have the Falcon installed for whatever reason, we can help ensure that an adversary can't attempt to get into the environment via that entry point like we just ran through. So hopefully that makes sense, folks. And again, if there are any questions, by all means, feel free to drop them in the chat. But we'll run through really what the identity protection tool can do in addition to that example that we just ran through. So the solution can really operate in one of two modes. One of those we call identity threat detection. So again, think of that as simply the EDR version of identity, going through looking at all of your Active Directory accounts, your human accounts, your service accounts, privileged, non-privileged users. The second of which is actually being able to enforce conditional access. So what I mean by that is we can actually integrate with an existing MFA that you folks may be leveraging. Think Okta, Duo, even Microsoft's Azure MFA. If I go back to my workstation here that does have the Falcon sensor installed, just to highlight this, and I'll go to my domain controller. I'll retype in my credentials. Now you'll notice, right, I didn't get immediately blocked like I did on that unmanaged machine due to that rule. So what we're doing behind the scenes is actually calling on Okta's API. So you'll notice I get this pop-up. Specifically, I'm just rolling with the Okta MFA, just what I have configured in my lab, but I'll get a push notification sent to my phone. And now on my phone, I will accept that. RDP connection is successful, right? So it's pretty interesting. It's conditional access for even internal users, right? Think domain admins or anybody in general that you want to be able to enforce MFA on whenever they're attempting to do valid lateral movement. And of course, abnormal lateral movement as well. Why would anybody in human resources, marketing, finance be RDPing to domain controller? The answer is they probably shouldn't be, right? And I'll dive into the rule engine in a minute and what we can do with that. There's a lot of granular controls, but again, with the rule I had configured here, I simply said anytime that my AD creds show up in an RDP session, force me to MFA via Okta. And I'll highlight that real quickly here as well. And forgive our ugliness in our rules. Each SC has their own separate rules. So it looks like there's a lot going on. But again, the thought process is I'm going to get prompted for Okta Verify anytime that my Matthew McDermott credentials RDP to a domain controller, and it's specifically coming from the workstation I had in place there. The nice thing about the rule engine though, all of these are extremely configurable. So if I remove source name, right, this rule would still work. Anywhere where my credentials attempt to RDP, and again, I can also remove this one. So I could say anywhere that Matt McDermott's credentials attempt to RDP from, no matter where he's coming from, where he's going to, prompt him for MFA. Now, we can also add additional attributes, and let me remove Matthew McDermott here. We could do any of these flags that you're seeing below, right? I could do user department, user active directory group, user OU. User active directory group is an interesting one, right? We could say, well, I only want domain admins, for example, to be able to, or because they have a higher level of access in the domain, I'm going to verify their identity via Okta here, like we're saying. So we do have a lot of control. And of course, we could also set this to exclude. So block anybody that isn't a domain admin, for example, from RDPing. Same idea again, as we said before, user department, user group, all can be include or exclude based on different use cases that you're looking to solve. Awesome. But going back to the dashboard here, I'll give this a minute. It's also possible I was inactive for too long. I've had this scenario or had this lab up for a while. There we go. So overall, what we're looking at here, think of this as, we call it domain security overview, as you'll notice on the top left. I tend to think of these as Active Directory insights. So you'll notice that our domain has a high risk score of 8.9. Below that, we can see some of the compounding factors contributing to said 8.9 risk score. Stack ranked based on severity, right? We'll see attack path to privileged account. Circle back to that one in a minute. One of my favorites is compromised passwords. So pretty clear, but what we're doing is a password hash comparison with the Have I Been Pwned database, right? Simply validating if a user's password is on the dark web. Doesn't imply that any of these accounts have been breached or anything like that, of course, but simply as a best practice, we should probably remove any account from showing up as having a known bad password, so to speak. And the ability to actually highlight which users are fitting that criteria is just as important. Like I said, I'll circle back to attack path and a privileged account in a moment, but you also notice some other ones, other insights like inadequate password policy, right? their password complexity and strength isn't meeting your internal standards that you've set via group policy. Things like SMB signing disabled, right? Of course, from recommended action, we know that we should be disabling, or excuse me, enabling SMB signing wherever we can via group policy. But more importantly, again, you can see the different devices that are fitting this criteria where SMB signing is currently disabled. The third one I'll touch on is stealthy privileges. So the thought process here, and I'll click into one of these. Highlighting why a user is considered to be a stealthy admin, which means that they don't belong to any security groups in Active Directory that are privileged, yet they're still considered to be a privileged user. In this circumstance, Robert Replicate, we gave him a creative name, but is permitted to replicate domain information, including hashes. Therefore, he's considered to be a stealthy user. And again, he doesn't belong to any of the native Microsoft groups, account operator, administrator, domain admin, where he'd be inheriting that privilege from. And I'll go back to the domain security overview. Now we have the ability to filter even farther. So as I was getting at before, we can filter simply on any privileged user, if that was the goal, or we can filter on any user that exists in Active Directory. You'll notice the denominator I've highlighted here. So we have 5,086 objects in Active Directory. That means human accounts or service accounts. We've already gone through the compromised password list, but we can also look at things like stale accounts. So what this is telling us is that these accounts haven't logged in the last 90 days, indicated by the cobweb icon, right? And mainly from an Active Directory cleanup perspective, we can ask ourselves, well, if this account hasn't been used in 3 months, why is it still out there, right? We should certainly move it to a locked or even disabled mode if it hasn't been used. And on top of that, this account is actually never logged in, right? So if we learn more about this account, we dive into timeline here. This is created back in May. So again, the wheels are spinning in my head. Why hasn't this account been used? And why is it not currently disabled if it hasn't been used in over 90 days and certainly almost half a year at this point, which is crazy to believe. The other piece I always like to highlight, folks, is what we call Threat Hunter. So think of Threat Hunter here, and again, I'll give this a minute to load. Wants to be nice and slow for me, of course. Give this a reboot. So think of Threat Hunter as really the EDR version of identity. So showing you all those authentications that are flowing through your domain controllers. You'll notice the top one there. When I attempted to RDP, right, you can see the machine that my MFA was triggered on. Furthermore, you can see below that where I attempted RDP from, and of course, where I attempted to authenticate to my domain controller. So if we wanted to look at things like failed authentications, right, we can see why that's occurring. You'll see blocked by Falcon. That was when I attempted to RDP from that unmanaged workstation right here. So blocked by Falcon attempting to RDP that domain controller in that first scenario. But we can also look at things like server not found on the domain, bad password, expired password, right? All these different data points that Active Directory natively supplies us with, we can also view within Threat Hunter. Now, one of my favorites is privilege escalation, right? So being able to see what roles were added, and it's typically more often than not, right, in our lab here, domain admin, but any privilege escalation, privilege de-escalation, all that data, again, that we're pulling from Active Directory can also be viewed. And thirdly, an interesting one, and let me bump this up from administrator, but anytime an account does get locked, right, being able to see the unlock log actions as well. Now, to dive into a specific Active Directory account is very simple. We can, in the search bar on the top right, search for things like domain admin groups, specific machines as well. So if I wanted to search for my workstation that I was looking at before, right, we can dive into that, learn about it. We can see all the SPNs associated with that machine as well. pulling in the ZTA score, and of course this is pulled from the native Falcon sensor that I have running on my workstation. Below that, getting insight into things like local admin rights as well on this box. Now, a really interesting component to mention is the first 15 to 20 days that the identity module is enabled. What we do is go through and think of it as baselining the environment. So understanding which users typically log into which machines, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. So you'll notice that this machine is frequently used by 3 users, myself, Frank, and Matthew. Now, if I actually click into my AD account, learn about who I am, right? So of course, I'm getting classified as a user in our OU. I'm a human account. You can see my description. And again, this is static data that we're simply gathering from Active Directory. A few other data points, you can see my password was last reset a month ago. And on top of that, my password policy strength is considered to be low here, right? Making me more susceptible to things like password cracking. You'll notice the binocular at the top here, and this is that workflow I mentioned before. So by virtue of me running Mimikatz on my workstation, it triggered that workflow, hence my Active Directory account joined the watch list, as did that machine I was looking at before, that WRK01B was also on the watch list. If you noticed, it also had that pair of binoculars up top. Now, I know we've been focused on on-prem Active Directory up to this point, but just so everyone's aware, we can certainly hook into Azure AD as well via API. We can hook into things like PingFed, Okta SSO as well to really expand which identity stores we're monitoring. It's not simply going to be limited to Microsoft Active Directory on-prem. Now, over on the right, you'll notice the different AD groups that I belong to. Pretty straightforward ones here, right? Domain users and domain admins. And you'll notice that the domain admin group has that crown icon, of course, indicating that this is a privileged group. Tale as old as time, but you're supposed to inherit your privilege, of course, from the Active Directory groups you belong to. Now, you'll notice if I click into Active Directory groups, right, the domain admin group, you can see all the other users that are also fitting this criteria. So the reason I call this out is because we're always reassessing Active Directory, right? We're simply not looking at it once up front, then forgetting about it. Because when we're talking about conditional access rules, we can actually use that user security group like I was showing before to build rules. So if all of a sudden the top user there, for example, John Vetrano, was no longer domain admin in our security group, well, right, we don't want to beat him to death with MFA or block the authentication outright if John is truly no longer a domain admin. So always reassessing the makeup of Active Directory in an environment. Now, if we go over to custom insights here, so I like to think of this as really different ways that we can slice and manipulate the data that Falcon Identity Protection is giving us. And this goes back to what I was getting at before as well. This solution can be really sold in 2 different ways. One of those is what we call identity threat detection, more or less, right? Again, alerting, insights, really everything except that enforce page and that enforce tab in the UI, right? The second option is what we call identity threat protection. So it's everything, right? It's all the insights, all the detections, but the ability to enforce MFA and enforce conditional access as well. So we have a lot of customers that start off with identity threat detection just to get a lay of the land. Maybe they're doing an AD hygiene cleanup project, right? So identity threat detection makes perfect sense. 6 months to a year down the road, now that they're comfortable with the data we've collected, they want to be able to turn that into proactive preventions. Hence, they can do a simple upgrade to identity threat protection. There's no new baselining that needs to occur, anything like that within the environment. But circling back to the custom insights here. So if I wanted to look for things like users that currently have insufficient password rotation, right? They're not rotating their password every 90 days like they should be. I check that box, I can look for a certain domain. I'll include my domain and we'll click apply here. So it doesn't look like any users fit that criteria. And let me do a sort across the entire domain. Perfect, right? So we'd say, well, no users currently have insufficient password rotation. So that's awesome. Everyone's meeting our minimal criteria there. Now, what about inadequate password policy, right? This means that a user's password is not really up to par from a strength perspective. Again, same idea holds true. Let's only look at human accounts. I'm not super concerned about programmatic accounts. So much higher number here, right? Over 5,086 accounts that exist in Active Directory, 5,009. So vast majority are not having complex passwords, which again, we'd certainly look to beef up to avoid any sort of password cracking going forward. Now I'll scroll through this list and let me start from the top and work my way down. So you'll notice things like access from banned countries, access using a concerning IP address, right? These are all native detections that we're pulling in from our SSO providers. Think Azure AD, Okta SSO, but also things like golden ticket attacks, credential scanning, right? Curb roasting, and TLM relay attacks. AD-based attacks have been around for the past 25, 30 years that really no solution in the market has done a great job of providing insight into. Those are right within our wheelhouse. So NTLM relay has been a big one. Even the NOPAC vulnerability from late 2021, back in the November timeframe, right? It was all about privilege escalation. Certainly something that we'll be able to provide insight into as well. And folks, just want to re-encourage, if there are any questions, by all means, feel free to throw those in the chat. But I want to pivot over to a different demo environment for a moment. And specifically, I want to call out what an incident would look like in identity. Oops, click the wrong one here. All right. So within an identity-based incident, and actually, let me take another step back. Really what I wanted to highlight was this more than anything. So these are all the attacks and detections that we have pre-built detections for, again, all out of the box. So I mentioned a few: credential scanning, password brute force, again, golden ticket, pass the hash, and TLM relay, curb roasting. And we sort of break it down to three main buckets, right? AD attacks. The second one is behavioral anomaly. I'll speak about that more in a minute. And the third is geo anomalies. So anytime that, again, a user's accessing an IP from a concerning, or excuse me, using a concerning IP or logging from a banned country, right, those detections would fire. But circling back to the baselining component, so really the first 15 to 20 days that identity is enabled, doing that baseline to understand where users typically log in from, like I had shown before. Why this is important is because, well, we can actually alert off of, hey, Matthew has never logged into this app server, right? My credentials have never been seen on this file server, for example. So when we go back in the rule engine, the ability to fire off an MFA prompt if a user doesn't typically use that machine. And what's nice about this is we can get pretty granular to say, well, I'm actually only concerned about this on Saturday and Sunday, right? In our environment, users may be doing and accessing machines often. That's outside of their baseline. However, if that's occurring on the weekend, that's the only time I want to alert on it, for example. And what's nice is not only can we alert, but we have the ability to ask that user to validate their identity. Again, the thought process is, well, Matt, you've never logged into this machine. Is this really you? Sure, it's your account name, it's your password, but as Brian said before, think of this as really the car key to your vehicle, right? If you drop it on the way into the store, what's to prevent somebody from grabbing your car key, driving off with your vehicle, right? Certainly looks like you on paper, right? It's your car with your key. So our thought process is we really need to ensure it is that password account match, right? So being able to force the user to validate their identity simply to make sure it's them when they're accessing a machine that they don't frequently access. And again, given the weekend here, that's an optional field. And of course, we could, if I do something like this, let's exclude. If there's anybody internally that's going to be authenticating into machines that they don't frequently use, it's the help desk team, right? So they're the exception to the rule. We don't want to get too many alerts on them doing this. However, we still want them to be able to RDP, to MFA anytime they're accessing said machine outside of their baseline. So having the ability to use these rules dynamically is beyond important. And I was one step ahead of myself, but what I wanted to touch on was RDP, right? So I know we've looked at this a few times, but we typically see customers using two rules to solve one problem. So again, the thought process would be, let's do user department, right? So anytime anyone in the IT department RDPs, prompt them for MFA. This is very much a part of their job description. However, anytime that somebody outside of IT attempts to RDP, again, go back to the other use cases we mentioned before, human resources, marketing, finance, it's probably very rare for these users to be doing that. So, and from an antivirus perspective, no antivirus in the right mind would ever flag RDP as a concerning or malicious executable. It's not, right? That'd be causing millions upon millions of false positives every day. So we're handling this from the identity perspective, saying, well, again, the IT team's allowed to do it. We're just going to validate it's them via MFA. Everybody that is not in the IT department, sorry, you're out of luck, right? This is outside of your job description. And again, having the ability, like we had shown before, to be able to exclude certain users, right? So Amanda, for whatever reason, she's not in the IT department, but she does need to be able to RDP as a part of her normal job description. So with that being said, we typically recommend each rule here begin in an audit phase for the first 1 to 2 weeks prior to us flipping it to MFA or flipping it to the blocking that we alluded to before. And it is important to mention, of course, this can be sold as a software only, or this can be also managed by the Falcon Complete team here at CrowdStrike, similar to what they're doing from an endpoint perspective. So identity can be fully managed. They go through, create the rules on your behalf, but would also be looking at the incidents 24/7, 365 days a year, right? So if we do detect something, again, going on Saturday at 2 o'clock in the morning, Complete team would have the ability to actually create a policy on the fly to thwart that adversary. So either prompt the user for MFA to validate that it's them, or again, outright block the authentication. So what we would do is actually what we call an appendix I, but more or less create a run book of what our customers are comfortable with when it comes to us taking action. So it's not always going to be one size fits all. You have to go with our way or the highway. No, you guys know the environment better than us. So certainly we want to make sure that we're not going to be stepping on anybody's toes. Hence why we set those guidelines up front before we actually flip it into a blocking mode or conditional access mode. But folks, that's really everything that I wanted to touch on. I know we still have about 15 minutes left roughly. So if there are any questions, again, by all means, feel free to drop those in the chat. Brian, was there anything else that you wanted me to touch on? I know we run hundreds upon hundreds of these calls a month. I guess anything else that you think I missed?
No, I think that was great. Surely there's some questions from the audience here. We do have about 15 minutes left, so would love to address anything while we're live. If not, Nathan, I can throw it back to you for final remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew and Brian, very much. It was a very informative presentation. I know I personally learned a lot. But yes, if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat real quick. But either way, myself or my colleagues will be in touch with you in the next few weeks. And thank you for attending our webinar. If there's something pending that it's on your mind and you have more questions for us here at SNL or the team there at CrowdStrike, feel free to reach out to us directly. And thank you so much for attending our webinar today here and on CrowdStrike. Thanks.
Thanks, folks. Take care. Bye.